The Tibetan concept of the Bardo. I'd like to think about it today in three parts. In terms of definitions, it's all about transitions and intermediate stages. The transition of every moment based in impermanence, of one moment not existing by itself, but always leading to the next moment. In practices, let's look at who is actively working with the teaching about the Bardo as a tool of compassion. And in the Western world, we have pop cultural references to the Bardo, which I'm calling Bardo in the Wild. The Bardo Thodal, or liberation through hearing during the intermediate state. I like the word hearing, suggesting that it might be best just to listen. When we talk about the Bardo, it is generally assumed that we are discussing the Tibetan Book of the Dead. But it's important to remember that this concept of the intermediate state is broader. The awareness that every moment is a transition from one to the next, and every experience isn't static unto only itself, but is in continuous motion on the way to the next experience. We have been talking about impermanence all along in this course. Remember from the Pali Canon, when Kisa Gotami was grieving over her dead son, and the Buddha sent her to get a grain of mustard seed from a house in town that was untouched by death. And of course she could not do that, and received a great compassionate lesson in impermanence from the Buddha himself. We have been circling around the Bardos this entire semester with learning in various ways about impermanence and transitions. For the purpose of this presentation, we are talking about the Bardo specifically in reference to the transitory states between lifetimes, according to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the belief of what consciousness experiences in the intermediate periods between reincarnations when the mind is temporarily separated from a body. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, translated in 1927 and so named, arguably misnamed, because of similarities to the older Egyptian Book of the Dead, which was originally written on papyrus. It's from Tibetan Buddhist writings called terma, meaning treasure. Literature is considered to be a treasure when it is revealed later and when the original author has an exalted status. It's originally from the great Indian tantric master Padmasambhava, or Guru Rinpoche, who visited Tibet in the 8th century and started teaching Buddhism there. He thought that the teachings were too advanced for people at that time, so the manuscripts were buried in caves and other hiding places. There was trust that in the future the time would be right and people would be ready to receive the teachings and they would then be revealed. That is in fact what happened. The book was revealed 700 years later by Karma Lingpa and is in the Nyingma literature, which is the oldest of 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism. It is a Dharma text from the larger collection of teachings called The Profound Dharma of Self-Liberation Through the Intention of the Peaceful and Wrathful Ones. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is a guide for the dead person, comprised of compassionate teachings for when consciousness is separated from the body. It teaches that life and death are a continuous flow of uncertain transitions called bardos. This is an example of the manuscript that was hidden for 700 years. In researching what language this is, I could only drill down to Sino-Tibetan, which is a mix between Chinese and then Tibetan, which is to say, the Tibetan version of Chinese texts. The Bardo Thodal differentiates the intermediate state between 2 lives into 3 main Bardos. The Chika Bardo, or Bardo of the moment of death, which features the experience of the clear light of reality, when one is more clairvoyantly clear than in life. I've read both 7 times clearer and 9 times clearer than before. That is to say, the departing soul can make use of their subtle mind and hopefully connect to the pure luminosity of clear mind. The second Bardo is Chonyad Bardo, or the Bardo of experiencing of reality, which features the seeing of visions in various forms. And finally, the Sipta Bardo, or the Bardo of rebirth, which features visions and which eventually results in rebirth, with sometimes with images of men and women sexually intertwined. But as a reminder, there are other bardos too, not just the afterlife ones. The liberation through hearing during the intermediate state also mentions three other bardos to give us six altogether. There's life, which is ordinary waking consciousness. There's dhyana, meditation states, and dream, the dream state during normal sleep. Any state of consciousness can form a type of intermediate state or bardo between other states of consciousness, such as one moment being a transition to the next. But today we're talking about the first three bardos, those having to do with the period after death and before returning to a body in the next life. As we know, we go round and round samsara until we can release from the wheel. There is an opportunity for liberation right at the moment when you die, called self-liberating luminosity, when your mind can move to the light and you are released from samsara. At the moment of death, if you can stay focused on the light, you will see that the mind is separated from the body, and all that happens next is a projection of consciousness. But if you're not prepared by training in life to recognize the nature of your own mind, you will miss that first opportunity, and you have to keep going around the wheel. Continuing on the journey, if you aren't liberated, you will see a vision of deities, beginning with friendly beings and then moving on to wrathful ones, or random images from your former life, which are all just projections of one's own mind. These are random snapshots from your life, and all are projections of the mind, and the task is to recognize them as projections and not be afraid. They help the person wander through the realms after death without fear, as the spirit and body part ways and only consciousness remains. It is the custom of monks or knowledgeable guides to chant the Book of the Dead to the recently deceased for 49 days. This helps to encourage the person to let go and to remind them that they are dead and that they are leaving the light of this world, and not to be afraid if the next light has not yet appeared. As we see here, at first, monks sit in the presence of the body and read aloud from the book in the belief that the person who has recently transitioned can still hear, even though they are separated from their body. The guides read aloud to remind the enlightened one that, speaking to them directly, that they are all just visions, whether they are peaceful, ferocious, or random beings and images. The body is rolled onto its right side, which was the posture of the sleeping lion in which the Buddha died. Incense is burned as an offering, which also no doubt helps when sitting next to a decaying corpse. Offerings are left to nourish and further encourage the dead person. After 49 days of reading from the Book of the Dead, the family gathers and there is a cremation or sky burial, which is for the vultures, of the body, which itself is an offering. Again, a reminder to the dead person not to cling to this life, whether or not the light of a next world has yet appeared. Into the left ear, the guide or monk will recite, "Hey, noble one, now you have arrived at what is called death. You are going from this world to the beyond. You are not alone. It happens to everyone. You must not indulge in attachment and insistence on this life. Though you are attached and you insist, you have no power to stay. You will not avoid wandering in this life cycle. Do not lust. Do not cling. Be mindful of the three jewels. Any possessions are donated. Prayers change from the recent death to encouraging anticipation of another human lifetime and are reminders to make wise choices as one approaches the next human birth, to do so without anger or fear, but instead have an attitude of compassion for oneself and for all beings. Life and death are a continuous flow of uncertain transitions. This is a picture of snowy mountains over and a frozen river. The Bardo has been picked up in popular culture in various forms, ranging from movies to music and a rock group called the Hungry Ghosts. I would like to share a few pieces from contemporary culture. In this picture, we see the album cover for Laurie Anderson's Songs from the Bardo and the covers of The Book of Living and Dying and the very recent Living is Dying, which are guides that help explain and teach about what is in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Also, they are written as guides to encourage us while we are living to know about the spiritual lessons for how to die, which by extension also means how we should live now. Also, it's important to know that the psychologist Carl Jung wrote on the collective unconscious and the concept of emptiness. There is also a recent work of fiction called Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. The scene is Abraham Lincoln sitting in the crypt with his dead son Willie's body following the child's death at 11 years old. The book is an active imagination of Lincoln conversing with souls in the Bardo and weaves history and fiction in a fantasy that is written like a dialogue or a play. This book has gotten a lot of attention and won prestigious awards for being considered a new form of writing. I read this book when it came out, and it felt like I was reading a kaleidoscope. It's a father and son story that crosses over between life and death. In the few minutes remaining, I would like to play a cut from the performance artist Laurie Anderson and her recent album, Songs of the Bardo, which puts an elegant artistic finale on this presentation. Thank you.